They treated me like I was invisible at my own family reunion. My designer clothes were called cheap knockoffs, my stories were dismissed, and I was literally pushed aside for photos. But when my husband's private jet landed in the backyard, everything changed. Here's what happened next. My name is Jade, and I live what most people would call a simple life. Every morning, I wake up in our quiet home, make coffee in my favorite ceramic mug, and spend time tending to my small garden. I drive a modest car, shop at regular grocery stores, and genuinely prefer a cozy dinner at home over fancy restaurants. What people don't know is that my husband Nathan is the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world. We could live in a mansion, own 10 sports cars, and eat at 5-star restaurants every night. But that's never been who we are. Nathan and I made a choice early in our marriage to keep our wealth private. We don't post about it on social media. We don't throw lavish parties, and most of our friends and family have no idea about our real financial situation. It's not because we're ashamed of success, but because we've seen how money changes relationships. We've watched people become fake, start treating us differently, or worse, only reach out when they need something. I'd rather have one genuine conversation with someone who sees me as just Jade than 100 shallow interactions with people who only care about my bank account. Family has always been everything to me. Growing up, some of my happiest memories were at family gatherings, listening to my aunts tell stories, playing games with my cousins, and feeling that warm sense of belonging. Even though we've all scattered across different cities and gotten busy with our own lives, I still hold on to that hope that we can reconnect and create new memories together. So when my cousin Clarissa called me last month, I couldn't contain my excitement. Her voice was bright and cheerful as she explained that she was planning a big family reunion at her house. It had been almost 3 years since we'd all been together, and she wanted to bring everyone back for a weekend of catching up, sharing stories, and just enjoying each other's company. The moment she mentioned it, I felt that familiar warmth in my chest. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Clarissa's timing was actually perfect, though it came with one small complication. Nathan was scheduled to be in Singapore for a series of important business meetings that same weekend. When I told him about the reunion, he immediately offered to cancel his trip, but I could see how much these meetings meant to his company. Besides, I thought it might actually be better if I went alone. I could focus completely on reconnecting with my family without any distractions. And honestly, I was looking forward to just being Jade again, not Nathan's wife or the CEO's spouse. The morning of the reunion, I stood in front of my closet choosing what to wear. I could have picked one of the designer pieces hanging in the back, but instead, I reached for my favorite pair of jeans and a soft cotton sweater. They were comfortable, approachable, and felt like me. I wanted my family to see the real Jade, the same person they remembered from years ago. I decided to take the bus to Clarissa's house instead of driving. It felt more authentic somehow, and I enjoyed watching the city pass by through the window, thinking about all the stories I wanted to share and all the questions I wanted to ask. My heart was practically racing with anticipation as the bus pulled up to Clarissa's neighborhood. I grabbed my purse and a bottle of wine I'd picked up as a gift, took a deep breath, and headed toward what I hoped would be a perfect family reunion. The moment I walked into Clarissa's backyard, I could feel something was off. The conversation seemed to pause just a little too long when people noticed me, and I caught a few family members exchanging glances that made my stomach tighten. But I pushed those feelings aside and focused on the excitement of seeing everyone again. My cousin Sabrina was the first to approach me, and I was genuinely happy to see her until she looked me up and down with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Oh, Jade," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's such a cute little outfit. Very practical." The way she said practical felt like she was really saying cheap, and I noticed her gaze lingering on my jeans and sweater. What she didn't know was that my cute little outfit was actually a $500 cashmere sweater and designer jeans that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. But I'd specifically chosen pieces without obvious logos because I wanted to blend in, not show off. As the afternoon went on, I tried to join different conversations, sharing stories about my work at the charitable foundation I manage. I talked about the literacy programs we'd launched and the community centers we'd helped fund, but I could see the polite but dismissive looks on their faces. Uncle Dean actually chuckled and said, "That's nice, honey, but what do you do for real work?" When I tried to explain that managing a foundation was my real work, Cousin Sabrina jumped in with, "Oh, you mean like volunteering? That's so sweet that you have time for hobbies." The career dismissal stung, but what hurt more was how they seemed to have already decided who I was without really listening to me. During dinner, I found myself sitting at the edge of the table while everyone else clustered around the center sharing updates about their jobs, their houses, their vacations. When I tried to contribute to the conversation, my comments were met with polite nods before the topic quickly shifted to someone else. The social exclusion became painfully obvious when it was time for family photos. Clarissa was organizing everyone for pictures, and I naturally moved to join the group. But somehow, every time the camera came out, I found myself being gently pushed to the side or told to wait for the next one. By the third photo, where I was left standing alone while everyone else smiled together, I realized it wasn't an accident. They were intentionally leaving me out, treating me like I didn't quite belong with the rest of the family. I spent most of the evening sitting by myself on Clarissa's porch swing, watching my family laugh and connect with each other while I remained on the outside. The wine I'd brought as a gift set unopened on the gift table, probably assumed to be some cheap bottle from the grocery store. I kept telling myself that maybe they were just busy catching up with each other, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But deep down, I knew something had fundamentally changed in how they saw me. The real breaking point came when I decided to contribute something meaningful to the evening. I had brought what I thought was a thoughtful gift, a bottle of wine that Nathan and I had picked up during a trip to Napa Valley. It was actually a rare vintage worth several $100s, something we'd been saving for a special occasion. This felt like the perfect time to share it with my family. I approached the group gathered around the outdoor table and offered the bottle with genuine excitement. "I brought this to share with everyone," I said, hoping this gesture might help me feel more included. Uncle Dean took the bottle, glanced at it for barely 2 seconds, and let out this condescending laugh. "Well, look at Jade trying to be fancy," he announced to the group. "Thanks for bringing something from your budget wine collection, sweetie." The entire table erupted in laughter, and I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. What made it worse was that they didn't even bother to open it. The bottle got passed around like a joke, with various family members making comments about my simple tastes and how it's the thought that counts. If they had actually looked at the label or done a quick search on their phones, they would have realized that this budget wine cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. But they'd already decided I was the poor relative, and nothing I said or did was going to change their minds. Just as I was considering making an excuse to leave early, my phone rang. It was Nathan calling from Singapore, and I stepped away from the group to answer. His warm, familiar voice immediately made me feel better, even though I was trying hard not to let him hear how upset I was. "How's the reunion going, love?" he asked. I forced cheerfulness into my voice and told him it was fine, that everyone was having a great time catching up. "My meetings wrapped up earlier than expected," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "I'm actually going to fly back tonight. I should be there by tomorrow afternoon. Would you like me to pick you up from Clarissa's?" The idea of seeing Nathan filled me with relief, but I didn't want to seem desperate. "That would be wonderful," I said quietly. "I miss you." What I didn't realize was several family members had drifted closer during my phone conversation, clearly eavesdropping. When I hung up, Cousin Sabrina was smirking at me. "Let me guess," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your husband's coming to pick you up. What does he drive?" "A taxi." The group erupted in laughter again, and Uncle Dean chimed in with, "Maybe he can give us all rides home. I bet Jade gets the family discount." I tried to explain that Nathan wasn't a taxi driver, that he was returning from a business trip, but my words were drowned out by more laughter and jokes about my simple life. They created this image of me as the struggling relative, and every piece of information they gathered just got twisted to fit their narrative. When I mentioned that he'd be arriving tomorrow afternoon, someone joked that he was probably taking the bus too, just like Jade. The mockery was relentless, and I could feel myself shrinking smaller and smaller with each comment. The next afternoon, I was sitting quietly in Clarissa's living room while most of the family had gathered on the back patio for what they were calling round two of the reunion. I'd barely slept the night before, replaying all the hurtful comments and wondering why I'd even bothered coming. But Nathan had texted that he was close, and I was counting down the minutes until I could leave this nightmare behind. That's when we heard it, a low, thunderous rumbling that seemed to be coming from directly overhead. At first, everyone assumed it was just a regular airplane flying a bit too low, but the sound kept getting louder and closer. Conversations on the patio stopped as people looked up at the sky, trying to figure out what was causing such an unusual noise. "Is that a helicopter?" someone called out. But the sound was different, deeper, more powerful. I knew exactly what it was, and my heart started racing for entirely different reasons than it had the day before. Through the living room window, I could see a sleek, white private jet circling the neighborhood, looking for a place to land. Nathan had texted earlier about potentially landing in the large field behind Clarissa's subdivision. But seeing it actually happen felt surreal. The entire family had now gathered in the backyard, craning their necks to watch this private jet make its descent into the field that bordered Clarissa's property. The aircraft was beautiful, pristine white with elegant silver accents, the kind of jet that screamed wealth and success. As it touched down gracefully in the field, I could hear my family members speculating wildly about who could possibly own such an expensive aircraft. "Maybe it's some celebrity," Clarissa whispered. "Or a politician," Uncle Dean suggested. Sabrina was already pulling out her phone to record videos, probably hoping to post about the excitement on social media. None of them had any idea that this beautiful, impressive jet belonged to the husband of the woman they'd been dismissing and mocking for the past 24 hours. Within minutes, I could see a figure walking across the field toward Clarissa's backyard. Even from a distance, I recognized Nathan's confident stride, the way he carried himself with quiet authority. He was wearing one of his perfectly tailored business suits, the kind that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he looked every inch the successful CEO he was. The family's chatter died down as this impeccably dressed stranger approached the fence line. Nathan spotted me through the crowd and smiled that warm smile that had made me fall in love with him years ago. "There's my beautiful wife," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. The word wife seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over my family. I walked toward him, feeling like I was in a dream as every single family member turned to stare at me with expressions of complete shock and confusion. Nathan reached over the fence to take my hand, and I could feel the expensive fabric of his suit, smell his familiar cologne, see the genuine concern in his eyes as he noticed my emotional state. "Nathan," I said softly, and just saying his name felt like a lifeline. "Everyone, this is my husband Nathan." The silence stretched on for what felt like forever as my family processed this information. Then Uncle Dean, who had been making jokes about taxi drivers just hours earlier, stammered, Your husband owns that jet?" The next few minutes were a blur of frantic phone searches and whispered conversations as my family tried to figure out who Nathan really was. I watched Sabrina's face go from confusion to recognition to absolute horror as she obviously found his Wikipedia page. Uncle Dean was showing his phone screen to anyone who would look, and I could hear fragments of their shocked conversations. CEO of, net worth of billions. How did we not know? The transformation in their behavior was immediate and nauseating. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to me. Cousin Sabrina, who had been mocking my cheap clothes, was now gushing about how classic and elegant my style was. Uncle Dean, who had joked about my budget wine, was asking if I could introduce him to some investment opportunities. Clarissa was practically begging me to stay longer, suggesting we order catering from the fanciest restaurant in town. But the most telling moment came when someone finally opened the bottle of wine I'd brought. Clarissa's husband looked up the vintage on his phone and went completely pale. "This bottle costs $800, he announced to the group. And you could have heard a pin drop. Suddenly, my budget wine became Jade's incredibly generous gift, and everyone wanted to know where I'd gotten such an exclusive bottle. Nathan, to his credit, remained polite but distant as family members tried to introduce themselves and make conversation. He could sense my emotional state, and I could see him taking mental notes of how everyone was treating me now versus how they treated me before. When cousin Sabrina started going on about how we always knew Jade was special, Nathan just raised an eyebrow and said, "Yes, she certainly is." I finally found my voice and addressed the group directly. "This is exactly why we keep our private life private," I said, looking around at all the faces that had been so dismissive just hours earlier. "Yesterday you treated me like I didn't belong in this family. You mocked my clothes, dismissed my work, left me out of photos, and made jokes about my husband. Today, because you know about money, you suddenly think I'm worth your time and respect." The shame on their faces was obvious, but it was too little, too late. I came here hoping to reconnect with my family, to have genuine relationships based on love and shared history. Instead, I learned that your respect and inclusion come with a price tag. Nathan squeezed my hand supportively as I spoke, and I could feel his quiet strength giving me courage. We left shortly after that, walking hand in hand across the field to where the jet was waiting. As we reached the aircraft, I turned back to see my entire family standing in Clarissa's backyard watching us leave. Some were still holding their phones, probably researching more about Nathan's company. Others just looked stunned, like they were trying to process what had just happened. As we settled into the comfortable seats of the jet, Nathan finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "How did they treat you, really?" I didn't have to say anything. He could read it all in my expression. He pulled me close and said, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone." As we flew home, I realized that this painful experience had taught me something valuable about the people in my life. The family members who truly mattered would have treated me with love and respect regardless of my bank account. The ones who didn't were never really family at all. They were just people who happened to share my DNA. Real relationships aren't built on what you can provide or how impressive you appear. They're built on genuine care, shared experiences, and mutual respect. And sometimes, you have to lose the fake relationships to make room for the real ones. This story isn't just about Jade. It's about every person who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or left out, until power showed up behind them. If this story hit you in a place words can't explain, don't just scroll past it. Hit that like button to say, "I see you." Share this video with someone who's forgotten how powerful they are. And subscribe, because next time, we're telling the other stories in the next video.